Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
Here I will ask a lot of questions because this is very important.
Okay. A lot of questions.
A lot. This is very
Много вопросов будет.
a lot because this is very important.
Березня.
March the 6th, it's Media Center, Ukrinform. I'm Svetlana Chiporenko. Let's discuss the draft law on mobilization. Fedir Venislavskyi is the Member of Parliament of Ukraine, member of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, representative of the President of Ukraine to the Верховна Рада of Ukraine. Hello? No, I'm no longer the representative of the President, but the sub-chair of the Committee on Military Innovations. Okay, got it. So this draft law on mobilization, what's the status quo? What provisions will remain, and what are the contradictory norms that might be taken out? Well, it's too early to say which provisions will stay and which will go, because the ultimate decision is to be made during the parliamentary hearings. And so our committee reviews the drafts, and our decision contains recommendations to the parliament. And as to the review procedure itself, a couple of minutes before this Zoom session, I came from the session of our committee. We've been discussing this draft law for a number of days now, and today we've been reviewing the recommendations of the National Agency for Prevention of Corruption, because by law they have the mandate to recommend, and they provided 6 recommendations, which we partially agreed and partially disagreed. And by the way, with some of those that we agreed, we have already modified our draft before. Also, we discussed a number of issues about the mechanism of delaying the mobilization for those people who are taking care of bedridden people with disabilities. And that's the most sensitive issue. In Ukraine right now, the legal status that allows the delay for mobilization to those people who take care of people with the degree 3 of the level of crippleness. And tomorrow we will discuss it with the Ministry of Social Policy and the Health Care Ministry. Tomorrow we're going to be discussing all the medical, not only military considerations, and unfortunately the ability for people who take care of disabled persons to receive or to be granted the delay. So the Social Policy Ministry people told us that the number of people with official documents stating that they have the 2nd and the 3rd degree of crippleness, a couple of times more than we had before the invasion. So on the one hand, we need to defend the rights of citizens of Ukraine and protect the rights of people with disabilities and other such strata of population. On the other hand, on the balance, we need to demobilize those who are already fighting for 2 years, but that's why we need to have troops in reserve who would be substituting those who would be demobilizing from the armed forces and the forces of defense. And tomorrow, confidentially, we're going to be discussing the criteria which our committee will recommend in terms of demobilizing people during the martial law time. So the consensus is 36 months. So you have to serve for 36 months after you've been mobilized, but your involvement in combat operations or you were fighting in the rear, that's what we're going to be discussing tomorrow. We'll have the comparative table, and come next week, we'll start discussing the comments for each article of the draft law. So when do you think this draft law could be adjusted and modified, and when the Parliament could start voting for it? We are set in our committee to spend 1 to 2 weeks for our report. Then we will vote within our committee and then give the voted wording for the hearing in the Parliament, which might happen in second reading by the end of this month. Lots of military experts recently claimed that everyone will serve. So after this draft law, after it's being approved, will it legalize this idea that everyone will serve? Well, this idea, the statement that everyone will serve, well, defending the territorial integrity and freedom of this country is the objective for us to reach after the war, because this draft law will substitute the current way of recruiting soldiers, but instead we will offer basic military training for college students and for those who are not students, and it's 5 months of basic training, of which 3 months of boot camp and 2 months specialized military training. Now, the provisions on total coverage of all the males between 18 to 60 years of age, the committee decided that these norms will come into force only when the martial law is lifted, when the war is over. But currently, with this draft law, we try to avoid the misuse of certain norms that allows people delay for mobilization because, for instance, educational reasons, and by the way, the current law does not limit the number of higher learning degrees, the second, third, fourth, fifth, and all of that will be grounds for delay for mobilization. We'll take care of this. All the higher learning degrees, the second, the third, the fourth, will not be the grounds for delay anymore. Also, when there was one disabled person, but there were multiple people registered as those who are taking care of that crippled person. And the status of crippled persons or the persons with disabilities, again, would also require re-examination of medical grounds to be granted such status of a disabled person. Thank you. Now questions from the journalists. Елена Милошенко, Ukrinform. What are the toughest provisions? Where it's the toughest to find the consensus? Unfortunately, because of various reasons, objective and subjective, this draft law is of a high political and social profile now. So lots of MPs who are filing changes and amendments to this draft, they are operating like populists, because our two objectives right now is not only protecting the rights and freedoms of people, but also to protect the independence and the existence of our country. And so the toughest issues are the grounds for delay for mobilization, they, like I mentioned, second or third higher learning degree, or persons who are taking care of disabled relatives. So these are the issues that we're still discussing and deliberating. And like I said, Ministry of Social Policy and the Ministry of Healthcare, the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Digital Transformation, confidentially will come together, we'll discuss all the statistics, we'll look at the level of misuse, the information coming from the law enforcement agencies. So the largest number of complaints that we as MPs receive is on the misuse of this right for delay of mobilization. Second big stumbling block is the duration of service that allows you to demobilize. Before the invasion, the total number of armed forces was 256,000. Now, the real number is increased 4 times, and most of those servicemen fight from day one, and they need to learn when would they be able to come back to their families and stay with their families for at least 1 year. So our job is to ensure that those who are demobilized after 2 years of service will have reserves to allow the forces of defense to not only continue defending, but also liberating the invaded territory. So these are the two most difficult issues. After issues under discussion were the grounds to be taking off the register, recruitment register, and whether the vійськкомати, the recruitment officers, will have the right to apply certain restrictions on people who refuse to come into recruitment office. We believe that only forbidding persons to drive their cars should be the only punishment, not freezing the accounts or penalizing them. Okay, thank you. Next question.
My name is Lorenzo Cremonesi, writing for the major Italian daily Corriere della Sera from Italia. Sir, sorry, having been in this country from the beginning of the war and going very often to the front line, we were just recently at the Avdiivka area with my colleague. Sorry, we understood that the question of this law you are discussing is vital for the existence of your country. If you will lose the war, one of the reasons will be not only the lack of ammunition, the lack of help from the Western allies, from the NATO countries, but the incapacity to change your soldiers. I can tell you, sir, that you have your soldier on the front line. They are exhausted, and everybody from the trenches in Bakhmut, in Avdiivka, in front of Zaporizhia, are talking about the need, even the most, determined soldier, to go home. Just a few days ago, here in front of, in Maidan, there were a group of ladies demonstrating, but this is only the peak of the iceberg. There is the profound discontent. I repeat, one of the reasons for the defeat of this country will be the incapacity to draft this law, to have this law, to have the rechange of soldiers. So the first question, I have some questions, but the first one is, when you realistically think you will come out with this law? And secondly, how many people, how many soldiers? Because at the beginning, Zaluzhny asked for 500,000 soldiers. And we understood Zelensky was not happy because of popular reason. Of course, politically, he's not very popular. Of course, he's not very popular. But so how many soldiers, and when this soldier will be, with this law, go to replace the guys who were there for 2 years fighting? First question.
Thank you for your question. The National Committee for Defense Security in the Parliament, our job is to ensure the balance between protecting the rights and freedoms of civilians and to ensure the existence, territorial integrity, independence and sovereignty of the country by supporting manpower of our armed forces. So, of course, we recognize that soldiers who are exposed to extensive fights during two full years, and we couldn't possibly foresee that the intensity of the fights would be so high. So both the President, Volodymyr Zelensky, and this draft law set as one of the clear objectives is to ensure that those soldiers that were fighting for the last 2 years could be finally demobilized, and the exact timeline, 36 months in service. But that doesn't mean that these were the persons who were 36 months in service, but there should be separate treatment of those soldiers that you mentioned, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, where there are active hostilities. And so those troops that perform combat operations with the risk to their lives, the timeline for them should be different. And tomorrow we'll be finalizing this discussion in our committee. Only then we'll know what would be this ratio of combat experience. Like 1 month in the trenches would be equivalent of 3 months. So 36 months in total for demobilization might be reduced to 12 months for those who were in the trenches. So again, we're going to be discussing it tomorrow, and the most important thing is not to reduce our ability to defend the country. And the Ministry of Defense and the new Commander-in-Chief, Mr. Syrsky, are conducting the audit of how efficiently troops are using their soldiers, because the use of there are fewer soldiers who are fighting in the trenches right now, so we need to reconsider the rationale behind using certain units and troops in the rear and in the front line. So this balance is what we're also in the process of discussing. And the third issue, we are weaker in terms of human potential compared to the aggressor country. They are not valuing their people. They can easily kill hundreds of their soldiers for 1 square meter of occupied territory. But together with the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Digital Transformation, we are coming up with the models of asymmetric warfare, when with the use of modern technologies we can hit the enemy targets, like yesterday when unmanned naval drone downed yet another Russian battleship. But again, back to a question about when the parliament will be ready to vote for it. Our position is as soon as possible, because then we start changing and demobilizing the old soldiers and changing them with the new ones. And back to a question about the numbers, well, the figure would be fewer, lesser than the amount stated by former Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny. But for the time being, I cannot tell you the exact number.
Okay, understood. Fewer than 500,000. Some people were talking about between 300,000 and 400,000 would make sense. And another clarification on this point: can we assume that for the end of March the law will be approved, will be on air?
Unfortunately, this sounds like an overly optimistic scenario. By late March, our committee could only recommend this draft law to be reviewed in second reading. But taking into account how many proposed changes and amendments were submitted by so many MPs, and during the parliamentary hearing, the MPs could add additional changes, and it will take a while, many days probably, for such hearings. So the spokesperson of the parliament will be discussing with the chairs of the committees that late April, early May, that's when this draft law most likely will be approved by the parliament.
Okay, well, it's coming from the front line. It sounds to me absurdly late. I know that democracy is a very nice thing, but democracy in war sometimes have to compromise with reality of war. Sir, and on this term, I have another question on exactly on this subject. How come? I will ask you personally. I mean, you are an Ukrainian, clearly committed to the defense of your country. So the question is, how come only now you are discussing this law? This law should have been approved already the first year of the war. I mean, people who should have discussed, the parliament should have approached this question immediately when it was clear that this war was going to be so long, so costly, so difficult. So how do you explain that only 24 months after the invasion, and now we're going to the 25th, you are still discussing an existential law as this one? How do you explain it?
Well, I can explain it with very simple reasons. I believe the history of world wars never discussed this issue of demobilization before the combat hostilities are over. But in this country, the society and the political parties started discussing something that before the world history never witnessed. And the intensity of combat operations at the territory of Ukraine in a lot of cases, according to the experts, was more intensive than during World War II, when there was so much artillery pieces, tanks, and soldiers used at the same time on the battlefield. So, you're right, we need to start balancing the realities of this war, and those challenges prove to be more severe than we could hope. But from day one of this invasion, the whole parliament came together as one team and supported all the draft laws that would strengthen the sector of security and defense. And such laws would also receive constitutional majority, 300 plus votes in favor. But this particular draft law because of various reasons, became overly politicized. And this slows down the review. So we are the hostages of the procedure now. But I'm convinced this procedure would be used to approve this draft law as soon as possible in a matter of weeks.
Privilege to asking you a question and to push a little bit. Sorry to be so tough, but I really think it's existential. Yeah, you say it's becoming too politicized. Can I ask you if you personally criticize the government for the failure? Because I consider this a failure. And you speak only about the mobilization, but the mobilization maybe is not the main point. The main point is mobilization. The main point is to have more soldiers. When you go to the trenches, you have commanders who tell you frankly, we were few weeks ago in the area of Kupiansk. They were telling me, we don't have people in the trenches. And he was not even mentioning the question of ammunition. Of course, there's a problem of lack of ammunition, of missile, of anti-aircraft, anti-drone, drones. But the question was, I don't have men to guard my trenches. So no men. So, okay, demobilization is one of the points, but mobilization, taking more soldiers, how to, a mechanism to stop with the corruption, all this should have been discussed 2 years ago. So my question is, do you consider this a big political failure of this Zelensky government?
Well, you asked a number of questions. Let me entertain all of them. So, of course, we are criticizing the government for initiating such important vital laws so late. As to the strength, the number of personnel in our military forces, in our troops, well, we should remember about the lack of readiness to give Ukraine what we needed, not only munition, but cannons and then tanks and then armored vehicles. These are the decisions that are also being made years late, too late. And right now we are fighting, and you're right, we are fighting for our future. But according to our constitution, the highest value are people. So we need to preserve this country, but also preserving the people. And we could save more people if we would get as many conventional armaments as possible. We no longer are a nuclear power. And we were promised that we will get enough convenient military equipment. We received those guarantees and never received it on time, and still are not getting. And everybody is still discussing in the West whether it will lead to another level of escalation if the West will start giving us more accurate systems of armaments. And I've been traveling to Europe and to US, and in the US, congressmen directly and indirectly state the same. The government of the United States is not interested in escalation of this conflict. And my question is, what more can you escalate when we have full-fledged war already? So the question was not only in having enough troops in the trenches. It's not having to put so many people in the trenches by getting our hands on defense systems. That's, well, look at Germany. The chancellor, despite the decision of the government, still slows down giving Ukraine long-range missiles. So, as a politician, I cannot tell you for sure that we are ready to risk the lives of maximum number of people as while we can defend those values more efficiently. Thank you, Mr. Fedir. We discussed the draft law on mobilization. Media Center Ukraine is with you. Thank you. Stay with us.